So, if Street Fighter 6 was one of your first fighting games, you might be reading this title and saying, what do you mean? Dive kicks aren't balanced in Street Fighter 6. I'm getting punish countered by Cammy when I just try to do a medium kick. They crush all my low attack. She can go over all my fireballs. They're so good at going over fireball. They're so good at going over fireballs. And they can all be plus on block, letting her get in for free. And while yes, most of this is true, we have seen all of these things fail, these dive kicks are still very useful in Street Fighter 6. Yes, there's much more counterplay, which we're going to talk about in a sec, but they don't make them like they used to. Let's take a quick look at what dive kicks in Street Fighter used to look like. Now, I'm not gonna lie to you, I may be a bit biased here because Street Fighter 4 is the game that made me fall in love with fighting games, and spoiler, one of these dive kick demons is still my favorite character I've ever mained to this day. But I'm not here to compare characters or mechanics from one game to another. I love Street Fighter 6 just as much as I loved 4, but I'm here to showcase just how different these games really were and some of the countermeasures Capcom has put into the newer games like Street Fighter 6 to balance around strong tools such as the dive kick. So what makes a dive kick so good in the first place? Well, you know what, the most basic one, it changes your jump arc, making it very hard to anti-air with normals. If you're a character that relies on anti-airing with the normals, you might find yourself trading with them as you don't know exactly when the person is going to fall down. And although you could say this has always applied to moves like Akuma's air fireball, that's a good thing. Moves that change your air trajectory have always been difficult to deal with. Now, as you may have guessed, a lot of my videos are going to be talking about Yun, because that's the character that I mained in Street Fighter 4. But these problems happened way before Yun entered the game. These two characters in specific will show us some of the things that got removed from dive kicks in future games because frankly they're quite difficult to deal with. Now, some of the things that dive kicks used to be able to do still exist in Street Fighter 6 and even Street Fighter 5 with characters like Dalsim and Minot, but they were taken away from more offensive based characters such as Rufus and Cammy here, and characters like Cammy and Jamie in Street Fighter 6 can no longer do these things. The first very obvious one is the height restriction. You used to be able to do a dive kick extremely low to the ground. This made it so you could loop offense. Look, I did it so low there that I missed the Cammy right in front of me. So why was it such a big deal that you could do these dive kicks so low to the ground? Well, sometimes you would just see looping pressure where someone would continue to do the dive kicks over like this. Even if you could do this in Street Fighter 6, chances are you'd either be minus on block or you wouldn't be able to combo your dive kick because you're hitting them too high. In Street Fighter 4, however, and in many older games, the dive kicks had much more hit and block stun, allowing you to kind of loop pressure that was plus on block. And even if you hit someone like above the waist, you could still combo. Watch here as I'm going to try to hit Cammy at her waist or above, which would never combo or be super minus on block in Street Fighter 6. So when it comes to throw baiting with a character like Cammy in Street Fighter 6, although it's still possible for her to do this, as I'll show here, in Street Fighter 6, this is a risk you may be willing to take on your offense where you're going to give up 2 bars, and if you're wrong, you're going to be -2, which isn't punishable, but you give up your turn. Let's look at what that exact string looks like in Street Fighter 4. As you can see there, Cammy is barely leaving the ground. It was maybe an inch off the ground. With enough meter, you could loop plus frames that would just beat up anything, any button pressed. They don't even have to be throwing. You would just counter hit almost any button being pressed there. And if you were wrong, you were so plus, you could pretty much do whatever you want anyway. Obviously, this is extremely strong, and what Cammy has in Street Fighter 6 is by no means a bad option, but you could tell it's quite a bit weaker. So let's get to the point and actually talk about Yun. As you can see here, you can actually pick which patch you want to play a character on. So we're going to pick Street Fighter 4 AE just to show you what actually changed and how Capcom already started nerfing this mechanic back in Street Fighter 4. Yun is a character who is kind of comparable to Cammy and Jamie in that he's a very offensive character. He's still good on the ground, good footsies, and the dive kick just makes him that much more aggressive. So as I talked about the height restriction, Yun already has one in this game. He cannot do it as low as Rufus, but it's still quite low, as you can see. If you do it too quick, you just get this rising kick, which you would actually get in Street Fighter 6 as well if you did Cammy's dive kick too early. But as you can see, his height restriction is not too bad. It's still quite low, and it would be much more plus than it would be in a game like Street Fighter 6. Another big thing is that you could probably tell here is that dive kicks had much less recovery if they whiffed. Look how fast Yun jumped the second he missed that dive kick. People would literally use this as an approach tool just to kind of play mind games with their opponent of which way they're going to approach from. It's almost like a triangle jump in a game like Marvel. It's very quick, very low recovery, and something that is much worse to this day. If you've ever seen a Cammy or a Jamie whip a dive kick in front of your face, you pretty much have time to realize they've missed and punch them in the face for a punish counter heavy punch. This is not the case with a character like Yun, who's pretty much actionable the second he touches the ground. Now, all of these things are already a lot of small details that have been taken away from current dive kicks to lessen their power. But to me, the biggest nerf that the moves have gotten for characters like Cammy and Jamie, the characters like Dhalsim and whatnot can still do, but it's not as important to their game plan, is you can no longer do these moves from neutral jumps. This is a balancing lever that Capcom has used with other moves. As you can see, Akuma here can neutral jump fireball, and he can even jump back fireball. This made him extremely good at running away from you. This made his neutral jumps very hard to punish or even contest, because he may just neutral jump just to kind of buy a second, or on the way down he may throw a fireball, which if you walk into he would get a full combo. Now, Akuma's not in Street Fighter 6 yet, but I can probably guarantee you that this will not be the case for him when he gets here. In Street Fighter 5, he was no longer allowed to do his fireball off a neutral jump or a back jump, only forward jumps, and they were just much worse on your end. So why was this such a big deal for a character like Yun, and why would it be so strong if characters like Cammy or Jamie could do it in Street Fighter 6? Well, it has to kind of be coupled with the other things we talked about. If you were in this range against Yun and there was a low enough height restriction on his dive kick and he neutral jumped, what are your options? What can you even feel good about doing? There's next to nothing you could do about him neutral jumping. If you DP'd late and he did something like this, you're going to miss. He recovers quickly, he had a very low height restriction, you're going to fly over him and get punished. If you just wait to react and you want to walk at him afterwards, you're going to get hit by his dive kick on the way down. And as we talked about, the dive kicks were much more plus on block, much more plus on hit. This just means that you pretty much get combo no matter where he hits you with it if he's jumping it from this distance. Okay, so I want to show you a very famous example of exactly why dive kicks were so good. This is the grand finals of the last Capcom Cup for Street Fighter 4. Yun is a character with a dive kick, and you will see Kazunoko just neutral jumping in neutral so often, and Daigo is kind of just not sure how to deal with it. I want you to keep in mind that Yun's dive kick was better in Arcade Edition. This version is called Ultra Street Fighter 4, where Yun was already nerfed by this point, and we'll talk about those nerfs in a second. You see these neutral jumps, and Daigo, it looks like he might be buffering a DP, but he's not sure if he can commit to it, because what if Kazunoko does nothing? The threat of being able to dive kick off a neutral jump is already so neutral warping that it's something that's just been completely removed in future games. Now, the first time he does whiff a dive kick, he gets grabbed, but I don't think this would have got grabbed if this was Arcade Edition Yun, because he got an added recovery to his dive kick on whiff. Again, neutral jump. Look at Kazunoko, he's just playing the game in the air, neutral jumps, forward jumps, and it's so hard to keep him pinned down even for a person like Daigo, who's very good at anti-airing. And you see that? Right here, Kazunoko whiffs a dive kick in front of Daigo's face. If this happened in a game like Street Fighter 6, you would get punish counter heavy punched in the face. There's much more recovery to these things. What happens here? He blocks in time, starts his offense. He might win the whole round off this offense, right? Tries to dive kick again, it gets stuffed this time. Does his dive kick, it's plus frames, gets a command grab, and he's dead. Now, Yun obviously had a lot of good tools like a command grab that Jamie kind of has now, but everything's a bit nerfed and toned down. But as you can see here, just the threat of having a neutral jumping dive kick warps neutral so much that even someone like Daigo cannot keep Kazunoko pinned down. So here we have the Street Fighter 4 Arcade Edition version 2012 patch. Now this is ancient at this point, but I remember this to this day as a young player, crying one single tear down my cheek. As you can see, just a bunch of nerfs to damage and whatnot. But the one we want to talk about, the big one here, is the dive kick, and this is kind of just a tell of how they're going to deal with these in the future. All versions of the move must now be executed higher than before. So these are the height restrictions we talked about. There was the extreme cases like Cammy that we saw in Street Fighter 4. That kind of no longer exists unless you're a character like Dhalsim, who, even then, they seem like a little bit higher. Cammy's was like literally an inch off the ground. And Yun now gets an additional 2 frames of landing stun. Their kind of explanation here is now Yun players must be wary of how to attack and the use of the different versions of the move. So they're kind of saying you have to think about it more. And this is the thing they're going to carry into future games. Yo, I kind of still got it. That was a shit combo, but I'm surprised I could do anything. So if we look at Yun's dive kick, hitbox, and hurtbox, as you can see here, it was never crazy. They weren't like disjointed or anything, but they didn't have to be. The hitbox wasn't big, but so the hurtbox wasn't either. So it was kind of hard to challenge it unless you absolutely knew it was coming. Now let's compare this to the main dive kicks in Street Fighter 6. We don't really have to count juries because hers is used for a very particular purpose, but in terms of approaching, Cammy and Jamie, that green part there is their hurtbox. These characters get stuffed trying to dive kick in the most random, like for fun ways that it baffles me. Yeah, I agree that dive kick should be balanced, you know, but in this way in particular, I think this is one of the more funny ways they went about it because you just get situations like these. Here's an experience that happened to me very recently where I was just getting back into Street Fighter 6. I'm dive kicking over this Guile's sweep, you know, the tried and true reason that you want a dive kick, right? Crush some lows, get past the neutral, and we trade. What happened here? I don't know, but now he's plus 64 with all the Oki he ever wanted because he swept my dive kick. See Ryu's foot here? Yeah, he got him. He got him. Similar to my case with Cammy, this time Jamie just straight up loses. As we saw in the picture, his hurtbox extends much lower than Cammy's, but Cammy's kind of extends further forward. So this is kind of the first way that they went about nerfing dive kicks. And in my opinion, the least interesting one, it like leads to situations where both players just like are like, that was stupid, what happened? Okay, so let's take a look how all these changes ended up affecting dive kicks in Street Fighter 6. Now, they're quite clearly still useful tools. I'm sure you'd rather have your character have the option of using it versus not having it at all, right? But there's a lot more counterplay, which we'll talk about now. One, as we saw, sometimes they just seem to not work properly. You'll land on a sweep, you'll hit a fireball you're trying to kind of arc over because the hitboxes, or sorry, the hurtboxes have been extended so far downward like we've seen already in the hurtbox pictures. The other big change is that you are not just scared for your life if Cammy's doing this, right? Imagine in this game if Cammy or Jamie could neutral jump and at any time just come down like this with +8 on hit, +4 on block or something, you'd be scared for your life every time they just neutral jump because you wouldn't know if it's okay to move forward. You wouldn't know if you could DP their dive kick because what if they just do an empty neutral jump, right? And your DP doesn't whiff. Like even Cammy, who has a very far forward reaching DP, would not hit from here, right? It lands right in front of them. So if Jamie was neutral jumping, yes, I could DP his dive kick, but I can't DP his empty neutral jump. So it's just a very scary thought to have, which, you know, thanks to Capcom is no longer something we need to worry about. The height restriction isn't terribly high, but it's still there, right? I still just get kicks if I do it too early. That's about as low as you could do it, which is not terrible, right? It's still pretty good. It gets you in. The greatest strength to this day about dive kicks is one of the first things I mentioned when we were talking about them is that they're very hard to anti-air if you use normals. Now, people have been getting very good at DPing them, again, because they have to be off a forward jump. You're not scared if you're getting baited or not. Whether Jamie jumps at me like this, I could just DP it, right? But if he was to dive kick me instead, it's the same thing. I would just DP it. Now, it's obviously a bit harder to react to the dive kicked version because it's faster than normal jump, but the answer is the same to both. It's nowhere near the same as the neutral jump situation where you're not sure if you're even allowed to DP. To me, the greatest strength of dive kicks is when you're fighting characters who seem to rely on normals to anti-air. Now, Manon doesn't have to rely on a normal. She has this move, right? But she doesn't always want to spend meter. I've noticed myself playing against characters like Manon specifically, or something like this will happen where you could see the startup over crouch heavy because she sees me jump in the air, but my dive kick just stuffs it out. They're still super good in situations like this. And if Manon wants to start catching my dive kick, she needs to anti-air very early, which lets Cammy do this. Right there, I'm heavy punching early because now I realized she's dive kicking at me. So I need to do my anti-air much earlier. This makes Manon have to use this move instead, which will just beat both options as soon as she sees Cammy leave the ground. You can do it a bit early in case a dive kick and you'll still catch the full jump. So in these situations, dive kicks are still incredibly good in Street Fighter 6. Now, the situations in which I think dive kicks are the most interesting now, in that they're still useful but have a lot of counterplay for the defender, is that when they're kind of used to steal your turn on offense. So Jamie here is going to do a string which ends in his light dive kick and it makes him +1 on block, right? As you can see, now Jamie's +1. He can kind of start his pressure again because he stole his turn with his dive kick. Now, obviously, I could have interrupted that dive kick if I reacted in time, but it's still a good way to kind of steal your turn back. But the thing is that this is something that a lot of people aren't even considering yet until you get to the higher levels of play. And that because they made these dive kicks so much more precise, as we saw in the earlier pictures with Yan and Rufus, dive kicks would be plus pretty much anywhere you hit them as long as it wasn't at their like chest and above, right? These days you have to hit dive kicks very low to the ground in order to actually get plus frames. I'm doing the exact same recording as Jamie now, but Cammy is going to crouch block instead of stand block. And now Cammy is +1, all because it's the exact same string that Jamie's doing, but because your hitbox as the defender is a bit wider when you're crouching, Jamie's hitting his dive kick just a little bit earlier, and that much of a change is enough to just make him no longer plus. It's very hard for Jamie to tell if he was plus or minus, and it's very hard for the defender to tell if they're a plus or minus, because the dive kicks are so much more precise than they used to be in terms of getting plus frames. On top of that, if I was to just hold back as Cammy in this exact same situation, I wanted to walk back because I didn't want to get strike thrown, Jamie now whiffs his dive kick. So he has to be so precise in order to get plus frames, but as a defender, I have options to make him minus or make him whiff overall. And as we talked about before, when you whiff a dive kick in these games compared to the old games, you have a lot of recovery frames. So take a look at this. I'm going to make Jamie whiff his dive kick, and I can just punish counter him. For this one, I'm going to wait for him to hit the ground first, and I still get the punish counter. I'm not even doing it preemptively. There's much more recovery, and because they have to be so precise, plus have more recovery, this means the defender has so much more kind of chances to interact with dive kicks, so I think is a very good thing. It kind of feels that Jamie has to work for his dive kick to actually be good, but it still is good when he's using it well. But on the flip side, the defender can make it whiff, can make it minus, can just stuff it out completely, right? If you know he's going for strings like this, you could just hit him because the hurt box hits so far low. So I think in this way, Capcom has balanced dive kicks as a pressure tool very, very well. I still think they're a great neutral tool, especially I think Jamie got the short end of the stick, which makes no sense because his is gated behind one drink, whereas Cammy gets hers all the time. In terms of just a neutral tool, this is still just a scary option that is hard to react to with the DP, and as we talked about before, it might stuff your normals. But yeah, Cammy has this exact same issue with her dive kick, but it's still a good thing to have, like I mentioned. This is a string I do with Cammy a lot, where all you're really doing is you're pushing your opponent out of their range for the button they might mash on defense, right? So if Cammy does this to me, a lot of people may mash after 3 normals because every character's light attacks are minus on block. So if they try to do something like 3 normals into a medium kick, which some people will try to do on block, that's not real. There's too much of a gap that can be interrupted. So a lot of better players who know that will mash after the 3rd light attack, right? So with Cammy, you could do this string with your light kick in there, which kind of pushes characters out of the range of the normal that they might be mashing. But the nice thing about this with Cammy is that you can make it so they're normal whiffs if they're mashing, and then you can dive kick over it. Now you won't get a punish counter because, again, as we talked about, they balanced it around the height restriction. So as you see here, Cammy will hop over my mash normal, and she's not punishing it, but now she's +2. So this is a nice string for Cammy to have, where she can push you out of your range where you might try to mash back on her, but she can steal more plus frames with her dive kick. Now, just like we talked about with Jamie, they've quite clearly added a lot of counterplay to this situation. The first big counterplay that we've been talking about is that the defender has the option to just make this whiff, and then you get your punish counter, right? All you have to do is walk back just a frame. So this is a string that Cammy can get a lot out of, right? She can loop plus frames, she'll beat delayed buttons, right? So for whatever reason you're mashing late, like right here, okay, you know those hurt boxes. She'll actually get a punish counter sometimes, or sometimes she'll just get out of it. So it's a decent string for Cammy, right? She pushes it herself at a nice range. She can loop into more plus frames, but as a defender, they've given you so much more kind of ways to interact with it, right? You can just walk back. You can even walk forward and block it. Now she's -5, which is punishable, right? Great, you get a punish counter because of all of the balance changes they've done, which is like in this case the height restriction, less hit stun and block stun. It makes it so both ends have to think more about the dive kick. Cammy needs to space it particularly well, and the defender, if they know the matchup well enough, may realize that they have time to walk out of it, they have time to walk forward. It might not be plus if they crouch, right? There are so many more things to think about. And yeah, I don't want to go into every minor thing that Cammy can do with her dive kick. I'm sure we've all seen and got hit by it in frustrating ways. It's still a good move, but I think the way Capcom went about balancing these moves is fantastic, although I do think Jamie should be a bit better if it's gated behind one drink. But yeah, let me know what you guys think about the dive kick. If you think maybe they should be a bit better, maybe they're still too good and you want to see them be even worse. In my opinion, I think Capcom did a great job balancing what was once like the scariest neutral tool in Street Fighter. Not even neutral, even just pressure and plus frames. Now I think they're quite tame, yet still being pretty good and clearly used in some good ways. But yeah, let me know what you think, and if you like videos like this or you want to see any other kind of deep history of Street Fighter, we want to talk about old characters, old moves, let me know any ideas you have in the comments. I would appreciate a like, comment, and subscription. Stay beautiful, my friends.